In this lecture we're going to be looking at display status. As an administrator of a digital signage network, one of your key concerns will be the health of all your players. In Zebo you can see an overview of your player health on the displays page. Your view of the displays page can be customised by clicking on the column visibility button. Here you can see all the metrics that we collect from your players, and you can enable or disable any of them by clicking on them. So for example, you might want to see the version of the software that's installed, how much storage is available, its IP address, or you may want to see a screenshot of what's currently on screen. Whatever your preference, you can make that selection on the column visibility menu. Let's talk about some of the key fields that you'll find on the displays page in the CMS. The first field we'll discuss is authorized. We looked at authorized before when we were talking about players, but authorized in the column gives you a quick overview of which players you have authorized and which players are awaiting authorization. Next, let's consider last accessed. Last accessed shows the last time that the player connected to the CMS at the beginning of its collection interval. We covered collection intervals in a previous lecture. Last accessed can be a good indicator of network issues. If last accessed isn't incrementing as you would expect, so for example if the player is configured to connect once every 5 minutes as its collection interval, and the last access time was longer than 5 minutes ago, then there's likely a network issue preventing the player from connecting to the CMS, or the player may not be running. Logged in works in tandem with last accessed. It shows you if the player has collected as expected based on the collection interval that you've configured. So if the player hasn't collected as recently as it should have, then logged in will be a cross, otherwise it will be a tick. Status, in conjunction with the colour of the line which your display is shown on, determines the overall status of content downloaded to the player. Status has 3 possible values. It can be a tick, indicating that the player has all the media that it needs downloaded. It can be an icon of a cloud, which means that the player has changes pending but it hasn't started to download them yet. Or it can be a cross, which indicates that the player has started downloading changes but has not completed doing so yet. In normal operation you would expect the player to be a tick, and then when a change is made you would expect it to change from the tick to the cloud, and then shortly after the cloud to a cross, and then from the cross back to the tick again. When the player is downloading content, so status is shown as a cross, you might want to go and see what is being downloaded. To do this, go to the row menu on the displays page and select Manage. Inside Manage, you'll see a list of all the media items, schedules and widgets that the player is set to download and the status of each. Here we can see there's one large video file which is pending download. Once the download is completed, the page updates and we can see that the content has finished downloading. Sometimes it's useful as well to see the status of things as the player sees them. Each of the players has a status screen built into it, which can be accessed in different ways depending on the type of player. On this Android player we're clicking anywhere to bring up the top menu bar and then click the status button. This brings up the status screen. The status screen is often longer than will fit on one screen, and so there is a scroll provided so that you can scroll up and down to see the rest of the information. On Windows, with the player running, you press the I key on the keyboard and this will bring up the status screen on top of the current player window. Press I again when you're finished to close the window. I is the default key, however you can select an alternative key if you prefer in the display settings profile for Windows players. The player for Linux works in a very similar way to Windows. You press the I key to bring up the status screen. To close the status screen, you press the button at the lower left. The status screen for WebOS and Tizen players is accessed by pressing the OK or Select button on the remote control, which will bring up the top menu. Select Status from the menu and press OK Select again. The status screen will be shown. At the bottom is a button to close the status screen when you're finished. Most of the information you'll find on the player status screen is relatively self-explanatory. If you're speaking to our support team, they may well ask for specific pieces of information from the status screen. Most commonly, we'll want to know if the player is licensed, if it's a commercial player, which is shown on the licensed field. We'll want you to check that the date and time are correct, which is shown under current time, and we may need to know if the device is registered. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see any error messages that the player has logged and that hasn't been pushed back to the CMS yet. These are often key in diagnosing problems. Sometimes it's useful to see what the player sees, but from the comfort of your CMS. You can do this using the Request Screenshot button. From the Displays page, press Request Screenshot. Refresh until you see the new screenshot come in, and then immediately transfer to the Logs page of the CMS. You'll see a text-based representation of the player status screen logged there. This is often easier than visiting the player to collect the status screen. If you encounter problems where a player will connect to the CMS but won't download files properly, then one of the common causes of this is a bad cache at the CMS side. To clear this, simply select Edit from the row menu on the Displays page and then save the display without making any changes. This will clear the CMS's cache for that display and allow the player to download on its next collection.